JamPlay.com. The JamPlay Podcast.
JamPlay Podcast.
I am Chris Lipe.
I am Jason Mounts. We're joined today by...
Mike Keneally, that's who I am.
How are you doing today?
I'm good.
Good.
Happy.
So, Mike, introduce yourself.
I am a musician. I play the guitar and other things. Trained as a keyboard player, but I play a lot of guitar. And recently, people may have seen me touring with Dethklok as a guitar player, or with Joe Satriani as a keyboard player. But my first professional gig was with Frank Zappa back in the late 80s, and I played guitar and keys with him. I also played guitar and keys with Steve Vai in the 90s, back when G3 was just getting off the ground. I was on all those tours. I've played with a bunch of people, and I've also, concurrently with that, been putting out a bunch of solo albums, about 22 since the early 90s. So awesome. I just do a bunch of stuff.
So, is the Vai Zappa connection how you know Brian Beller then?
No, actually, Brian Beller I met through our mutual friend or drummer, Joe Travers, who in the early 90s, after I stopped playing with Frank Zappa, I ended up playing with Dweezil and Amit Zappa in a band that was first just called the Dweezil Zappa Band, and then it was called Z. And the original drummer in that band was Josh Freese, who now plays with everybody, including Trent Reznor and Devo and a bunch of people. And I had met Joe Travers at a Tower Records in-store in Boston. He was working at the Tower. I came through playing with Dweezil, and he gave me a promo package, and his dream was to play with Frank Zappa. It's all he wanted to do in life. And so he gave me this package, and I watched a video, and it was really freaking good. And so Josh quit the Dweezil band, and I recommended Joe on the basis of this video to Dweezil. Joe moved to California and joined Dweezil's band. Then Scott Tunis, who was the bass player, left the band in a fireball of controversy, and we needed to get another bass player in, and Joe Travers recommended Brian Beller, who he had gone to the Berklee School of Music with. So it was really... And Brian Beller came into Dweezil's band, and I resented him for several months for not being Scott Tunis, and I wouldn't look at him during rehearsal and stuff. I was a real jerk. But then I needed a sub bass player for my own band, which at that time was called Beer for Dolphins. We had a couple of gigs. My regular guy, Doug Lunn, couldn't make the gig. And Brian Beller had been trying to get my attention at Dweezil rehearsals by playing little bits of my own music, because I had an album out called Hat. And he would play one of my songs, and I was such an idiot. I would intentionally turn away from him, not even acknowledge that he was playing my music. I was mad because I liked the bass player that he replaced. But little by little, I began to see that Brian Beller was magnificent, and I asked him to sub for my bass player at these two gigs, and he just turned my head around. I was really impressed with him. So Brian's been my bass player for about 20 years now.
Awesome.
Wow. I didn't even think Brian was that old.
Well, he doesn't look it.
He started in the womb. It's just kind of impressive that he was able to develop that much technique at such an early age.
Yeah, and he's got that look. I mean, he's got the rocker look about him, the black long hair. Mm-hmm. You know, he wears all black. And then you talk to the guy, and he's strangely articulate.
He does. He subverts a lot of stereotypes about bass players, New Jerseyites, and any number of other subgroupings.
Well, it's funny because you cruise YouTube for a little bit, and you type in Mike Keneally, and you see all these other artists. And we were joking earlier that it's Frank Zappa, Vai, Brian Beller, Satriani. There's all these instrumentalists, all these musicians, and all these different artists, and they're all the same musicians with an emphasis on a different artist.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm. It's really cool.
Yeah, it's a pretty incestuous group. And now Brian Beller, it's official as of today. Brian Beller is going to be touring with us in Satriani's band later this year with Marco Miniman on drums. So and actually, I had a band a couple years ago with Brian and Marco called KMB, which was essentially the Aristocrats, but with me instead of Guthrie.
Right.
And the new Satriani band is essentially KMB plus Joe Satriani.
Yeah, that's really fun.
Yeah.
So
it's kind of the epitome of, friends helping friends, and obviously it's just, it's a stacking motion where you just have more and more on top of everything.
For sure. I mean, it's like the whole Dethklok thing came about through me. This is 2006 when MySpace was still a thing. I had sent Brendan a MySpace message because I was a fan of the show that he had before Metalocalypse. He had a show called Home Movies. So I wrote him to say, hey, I'm a big fan. And then he wrote me back and said, hey, I'm a big fan of you. I know your stuff. And a few months later, he formed Dethklok, and he said, hey, you think would it be okay if you asked Brian Beller if he wants to do the Dethklok gig too? So, Brian just follows me into every gig.
It's funny that you mentioned the MySpace thing. I actually got I still have some of my stuff out on a MySpace account. It's, it's not monitored. I haven't, looked at it. But I actually got an email from this morning. I opened up my email and it's like, hey, your stuff is great. Like, you should really do like this. And what it was somebody trying to like pitch their own stuff type, whatever. But I was like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. And
MySpace still exists.
Yeah, it still does exist in some. It's basically all a music thing at this point.
Right.
Yeah.
So your first thing was Zappa, right?
It was my first professional experience, not counting playing in bars, which was mostly top 40 anyway. So
yeah. So talk to us about getting the gig with Zappa. How did that come about?
Well, I was a fan first and foremost from the time that I was 9. All I did, I probably at least 60% of my music listening time was devoted to Zappa from the time that I was 9 years old. I listened to a bunch of stuff, but I just kept returning to Frank. He just had everything that I wanted from music. He covered so much ground, and he was funny and weird and super intricate, and it was really, really it was good exercise for me musically to learn his stuff off of records. That was a big part of what formed the bedrock of my abilities and technique was teaching myself Zappa stuff as opposed to sitting down and doing standard exercises. That's kind of what I learned with. So I was doing job preparation through the years without even realizing it, because when I was 25 and I heard that Frank was in rehearsal with a new band, which was big news because 3 years earlier he had said that he was never going to tour again because he lost too much money doing it. But he had this information hotline called 818 Pumpkin. I used to call it all the time as a fan just to see if there was a new album coming out or something. And one time I called and it said, just if you've heard the rumors, they're true. Frank is in rehearsal with a new band. Holy cow, that's a shock. He had spent the last 2 years just making music with the synclavier, the computer musical instrument, which never made mistakes and didn't do drugs and never showed up late for rehearsal. And he was kind of into machines rather than humans, very openly saying, I don't think I'm ever going to go on the road again. But here he was getting ready. He got tired of the predictability of the machines, I guess, and wanted a little more chaos in his life or something. But my first thought was, oh, cool, I get to see another tour. But when I gave it a little more thought, I said, no, man, this is my last chance. In fact, I had called him in 1985, a couple years earlier. He was answering phones at his office, the same office that I would call all the time. And they said, if you want to talk to Frank, call on this day at this time. So I called him and said, hey, it's always been my dream to play with you. And he said, well, I'm never touring again, so keep dreaming. But 2 years later, he changed his mind about touring. So I called the office the next day and I said, hi, you don't know me. Nobody knows me, but my name is Mike Keneally. I play guitar and keyboards, and I sing, and I know and love all of Frank Zappa's music. I had all 60 of the albums. I listened to them all the time. And it wasn't necessarily that I had practiced every single song, but I listened to them so much that they were just burned into my synapses. And since I wasn't trained as a reader, I developed my ear, I think, to compensate. So I got to a point where I could hear a song a few times and then give me a moment and I'll figure out the chords and I'll play it for you. So I called the office and I told the guy there, hey, just in case, don't know if Frank's looking for anybody, but I'm available. I might be a resource. Maybe I could be of some use to him. So Frank called me back the next day. Actually, the phone rang and I picked it up, and a woman's voice said, hello, will you hold for Frank Zappa? I said, yes.
When Frank Zappa's assistant calls you hold.
Yeah, exactly. No, so let me think on that for a moment. No, lunch is ready. I don't think I'll hold. No, I held. And Frank got on the phone and he said, so, I understand you know all my music. And I said, well, I backpedaled a little bit. I said, well, I'm very familiar with all of it, yeah. And he said, because like I said, I couldn't necessarily play it all note perfect for you, but I could at least describe it, and I could play a lot of it. And he said, do you know how many songs that is? And I said, well, yeah, they're all in the next room. I can probably just name them all for you right now. And he goes, well, I don't believe you. Get your ass up here and prove it. You know, he was in Los Angeles. I was just living in San Diego. And he named me 2 songs that he wanted me to work on, which were Sinister Footwear 2 and What's New in Baltimore. And they're both insanely complex. And one of them I had taught myself, and the other one I hadn't. What's New in Baltimore I had never played. So in the one day between getting this phone call and then going up to audition for him, I had to teach myself this crazy song and bone up on the other one that I hadn't played in probably 4 years. And my brother drove me up to the audition the next day, and I sat in the car the entire time in the back seat practicing every Zappa song I could think of, like literally trying to play every Frank Zappa song, which is impossible in a 2.5-hour car ride. And I was panicking, and this was very wise on my brother's part. Marty stopped the car and he turned around and he looked at me and said, "You are never going to be more ready for this gig than you are at right this moment." And that was like, I just thought on that, and I thought, well, that's so smart, you know. I could drive myself insane and really not get any more of a leg up on the chance of getting the gig. So I relaxed. I walked into the rehearsal room holding the guitar, because I'd just been playing it in the car. I didn't see the point of
no case.
I didn't put it in the case. So why bother? So I just walked in like Johnny Appleseed with a guitar on my shoulder. And Frank looked up and saw me and said, "Hey, nice case." And he just said, "All right, plug in." And he was playing this song called The Black Page, which has a reputation as being one of his more insane compositions. He was playing actually a computer orchestrated version of it. And so I quick plugged in and started playing along with it, so I could demonstrate to him that I do know this stuff. And then he just started naming songs, and well, he asked me to play the 2 that he had mentioned on the phone.
Yeah.
And I just worked my way through them, not masterfully. I wasn't at Vai level yet, but I was able to demonstrate to him, you can tell me a song on Wednesday, and by Thursday I'll be able to give you some approximation of it. And then he just randomly started naming songs to check my familiarity. And everything that he came up with, I was able to say, "Give me a second," work it out and play it for him. And he checked my reading, which was not too slick, but in one instance it was kind of funny because he put a chart of a song called Strictly Genteel up on the piano. And it was a song I knew well enough that I could play it by ear. So I was looking at the chart, squinting at it as though I was reading it really carefully and playing it from memory. And Frank is like, he's looking at the chart, he's looking at my hands, he's looking at me, he's looking back and forth. He goes, wait. Are you reading that, or are you just playing it by ear? And I said, I'm playing it by ear. And his eyebrows went way up, and you could tell that he got a kick out of that. You know? So it was really fun. I was nervous, but not crippled nervous.
Yeah.
Like we sang together. He wanted to hear how our voices sounded in harmony, which was a mind-blowing thing for me. So when it was done, he goes, the timbre of your voice is good, but do you have this like shaking thing in your voice? I said, "Don't worry, it's not there all the time. It's there right now, but it won't be there always." But it was mind-blowing, It was fun and a dream come true. And I remember word for word at the end of it, and Frank shook my hand and he said, "All right, well, you'll have to come back on Monday so the rest of the band can witness your particular splendor." And then my brother and I drove back to San Diego just like screaming. I screamed my throat raw. Just I couldn't believe it.
So what did you do that weekend? Like when you
I practiced Frank Zappa songs.
Yeah. Now, did you replace Vi? Or how did that work?
There was this long break. He did the last tour he had done with Vi was in 1982. And then in 1984 he did what, for all intents and purposes, looked like his last tour, and he didn't really have what he referred to as the stunt guitar position in that band. He had a couple of rhythm guitarists, Ray White and Ike Willis, but they were primarily vocalists, and that was a vocally oriented band. There were like 4 and 5 part harmonies on just about every song. That was almost like a party band. And then for the tour that I came in on, the emphasis went back to more expansive arrangements. It ended up being a 12-piece band with a 5-piece horn section and a lot of, orchestrational possibilities. So he did refer to me as the stunt guitarist, which was the position that he had developed for Steve in the early 80s. But as my role developed, it turned out that I was also playing a lot of keyboard parts and doing a lot of vocals. I sing, like there's a song called Elvis Has Just Left the Building, that's me singing on it, and I did this really low-rent Johnny Cash impersonation, so he had me do Johnny Cash on a song called Rhymin' Man and stuff like that.
So you're on the studio recordings as well?
Well, he actually didn't do any studio recordings, but he released a lot of albums from the tour. He recorded every show we did digitally, and 48-track digital.
Wow.
He had a mobile truck, follow us everywhere we went. So he got like more than 5 CDs worth of material out from that album.
Crazy.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty standard practice at this point anymore.
Well, anymore.
Yeah. It's so easy to just come off the board at
Well, yeah. Well, now it's a laptop. He had a truck with 48 tracks.
Exactly.
I was going to say, in the early '90s, having that kind of power.
So, do you consider yourself primarily a guitarist or primarily a pianist?
It depends on the gig. I mean, for years, I really thought of myself as a keyboard player, and guitar was what I did. It's kind of as recreation. I mean, I loved the guitar from the moment I laid eyes on the Beatles. I was obsessed with the Beatles as a kid, but my first instrument was organ. I had an organ for my 7th birthday. It's a little Magnus electric chord organ, and then I heard Emerson, Lake and Palmer when I was about 10 years old, and that blew my mind. The album Tarkus, it had a big effect on me compositionally too. So I definitely thought of myself as a keyboard player, but I wanted a guitar too. So when I was 11, I asked for a guitar for my birthday. I got it. I started teaching myself guitar, and I thought of the guitar as basically a series of keyboards stacked up next to each other on the fretboard, each one starting on a different note. Mm-hmm. And I taught myself guitar that way from my knowledge of the keyboard, the way that's laid out. And had a couple of books to show me basic chord formations and stuff. But just in terms of training, I was trained as a keyboard player. But in terms of expressivity and just the ability to just scream, there are things that you can do on a guitar that even with the most complex keyboard algorithm you can't really get out of a synthesizer in quite the same way.
It's very true.
Yeah, it's just the physics of strings rubbing up against each other and
right.
But I love playing the piano and stuff, but they're just completely different.
And yet it still is amazing what some of those pieces were doing. I think I was talking to Chris maybe last week about this. I've always been a Logic Pro guy. I've always used Logic Pro, but I'm going away from that. We could get into some of the stuff that I think Apple is doing or whatnot, but been looking into to doing Cubase. And one of the things with and I certainly have it. I have a Korg Triton Studio, fantastic keyboard, fantastic sampling, stuff like that. But everything is on pitch.
Yeah.
Well, even a piano is not perfectly pitched. They tune it from the center outward. So the further you go outward, you have some pitch irregularities. And so when you hit a keyboard, hit a chord on a keyboard that is using samples, it sounds right, but it sounds sterile.
Sterile, too clean. It sounds flat in a way.
Right. Cubase,
it almost sounds like it's not in tune, but that's because it's perfectly in tune.
Yeah, Cubase now has real-time pitch modulation for those situations.
Okay, cool.
I'm like that. People are thinking, and it's definitely rolling that way. But yeah, you're absolutely right. When it comes to keyboard and guitar, you can't, even with a mod wheel on a keyboard, you just can't get that feel.
Well, everyone was hypnotized by digital when it came out. With the reproduction of music and with the making of music and with the recording tools and with the synthesizers, and everyone convinced themselves that this was better because it was so clean. There was no noise. Now everyone loves the noise. And everyone with even just one ear can say yes, stuff sounded better in the early 70s than it did in the mid 80s. There's no question about it. So I think the process of people shaking off that hypnosis and realizing you can can do waveform analyses and understand why the earlier stuff sounded better. And people are starting to find ways to use the technology to hopefully get a little bit of the best of both worlds. You know.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So 21 albums you have?
I've lost count actually, but it's something around 21 or 22.
And these are full length studio albums.
Yeah, I've averaged at least one a year since 1992. There have been some years that I didn't put out an album, but there were other years where I put out 4. So.
And do you have? You're a complete thought kind of guy, right?
Yeah,
I mean, so these are full albums.
Yeah.
And when you go into making one, do you say? I mean, obviously with 20 something, how do you not repeat yourself? How do you not redo Hat 20 times?
It's real. I just will it to be so. You know, I want so much to not repeat myself that I insist on it. And any composer who remains one person through their entire life is going to repeat themselves in one way or another, because everyone has proclivities, everyone has just a taste for putting harmonies together in a certain way. So I'm not going to say that I've never used the same chord from one song to the next, but I do my best to follow it up with another chord that I haven't done before. I get restless. I maybe just kind of get bored easily or something. I'm still kind of a kid in some ways, where my attention span is a little limited, and if I don't keep myself interested, I don't see how I'm going to keep anyone else interested.
Sure.
So I really am grateful for the people who have hung in with me throughout the career and keep checking out the albums. I know that in some ways albums as an art form is starting to get a little bit lost, with people focusing on individual tracks, and I try to still reward the people who are sticking with me in this idea that an album as a statement is really valid. People will still sit through a 2-hour movie. They don't just sample one scene.
There's a story.
Yeah, and I think of an album as a linear art form with a narrative flow in exactly the same way that a director thinks of a film. That's what I'm trying to create. I don't make movies, I make albums, but I try to create an experience which is somewhat similar, so that by the end of it you feel like you've gone somewhere and felt something.
Yeah. Well, see, I first heard you on the first G3 video with Vi and Eric Johnson, and you were playing the Attitude song. I got it. This guy's got to be doing other things, and so went and checked out some of your earlier stuff. And one thing that sets you apart from a lot of other professional guitarists is that, I mean, you're a composer who happens to play guitar and keyboards.
Right.
Whereas a lot of guitar players, they start as a guitar player. Mm-hmm. And, I'm sure a lot of people listening to this have probably heard your music before, but talk about how being a composer kind of first and a guitar player sort of second has influenced your writing and your process for making albums and creating songs. And they can definitely hear it if they view the lessons or listen to your music. But
yeah. Well, yeah, I think I agree with what you say, and without for a second dissing any guitar player who puts out albums, I do feel like when you listen to some instrumental guitar music, you're hearing a sort of a showcase for licks and techniques, and you feel like sometimes that the music is created just almost as a necessary evil. Well, there has to be a song, otherwise I won't be able to play this lick. I never think that way. I always am hearing sounds in my head, and if I think that if that sound is something that needs to be explored, then I explore it. And it might be on a guitar, it might be on a keyboard, but I'm always searching for some idealized combination of tones, whether it be melodic or chordal or something, that is not something I've done before, because the moment I've done something, it's the eternal dissatisfaction of a composer. When you get an idea in your head, for one shining moment, you feel like this is the sound that will end war. This is the sound that will cure all disease if I can just make it real, And then you do it, and you go, yeah, that sounds okay, and then you move on. So I'm always trying to come up with the next thing that is somehow more personally inspiring to me, or spiritually moving, or just in some way better, without trying to put value judgments on this stuff, but just trying to advance, trying to move forward, trying to move up. and that's hardly ever a technique-oriented thing, but the fact that I'm trying to create new sounds requires me to develop techniques in order to execute it. So as a result, I've managed to sort of train myself to come up with things. It's sheer necessity. If I have to do two things at the same time on the guitar, and one's moving down, the other one's moving up, and I have to stretch like crazy to make it, then I make myself learn how to do it, just because it's the only way I'm going to be able to execute this sound that I need to hear, and that defines my music. It's always music first and technique. It's never a showcase for technique. It's just the technique is developed in order to make the music come to life.
Right. So you're more of a methodical composer then. Do you go into a composition session and you kind of know where you're going before you get there? You kind of have an idea of like a sound or something in your head, or are you more of, you kind of get there and noodle around a little bit and I like this concept and let's build upon it?
I've definitely done both, and only on rare occasions, if I go in with the idealized sound in my head, only on rare occasions does the final result sound like that sound. In most cases, I'll happen upon something else, some bright, shiny object along the way, and that I think makes it better. Whether that's true or not, if I get that little flash, then I follow that. So I usually end up with something. Inevitably, it's more elaborate. It has more overdubs. It's denser than the thing that I started with necessarily.
Right.
Just because when I get a certain combination of tones onto the recorder and I listen back to it, I might feel like it's like 98% complete. But if there was just like one harmonic right on this one beat, or something that sounded like someone dropped a vibraphone down the street, just like some weird event, then that is what's going to catalyze this thing. That's what's going to make this an ideal moment in the song. And then sometimes I will just have like the barest sketch of an idea and throw that onto the computer and let that just suggest what the next thing should be and what the next thing should be and the next thing should be. But the metaphor that I often use with composition is, what do I want to hear? That's what I want to write. What do I feel like hearing? So because I'm old, I equate that with a turntable. Although I guess vinyl is kind of hip again, but I think of it, okay, I've just put a record on the turntable and I've got my thumb against the needle and I'm about to drop it on the vinyl. What do I wish I could hear as soon as that needle hits vinyl? And that's what I try to write.
So, in addition to your writing, you play just about everything, in terms of, you might be playing keyboards for Satriani, and that stuff's very, in comparison with some of the stuff you write, very, very poppy and...
it's direct.
Direct, that's a good word for it.
That's why it's so freaking successful.
Yeah.
Joe is incredibly good at coming up with melodies. He sings through the guitar. He writes vocal melodies, which he then plays on the guitar.
Is that, as someone who... you kind of hop around to so many different musical genres and styles, is it sometimes difficult for you to put kind of brackets on your playing and, okay, I'm gonna hold down this chord progression here, and or is it freeing in a way?
Well, I'm grateful for the fact that I have this really peculiar career. Like last year, I went directly from a South American Satriani tour where I was playing only keyboards, with less than a day at home, right into rehearsals for a Dethklok tour where I was only playing shredding metal guitar.
Yeah.
I can take a step back out of my body and say, who does that? Right. It's the weirdest career, but it suits me.
Yeah.
So when I'm up on stage with Satriani and I'm just like holding down a chord progression on the keyboard, I'm totally cool with that, because what I like doing musically is, figuring out what can I do that's going to make this moment as good as it can get, So that means, figuring out ways to do special voicings on the keyboard. A big reason why Joe decided he wanted me in the band is because he liked the fact that, he's trying to think, who should I get on keyboards? Because he hadn't done that much extensively with keyboards in the group. And he wanted to get a guy, but he didn't want it to be just, he didn't want it to be a standard virtuoso keyboardist, whatever that is. And then he realized Keneally, because I play guitar too, So coming at the keyboard with a real understanding of how voicings work on a guitar, what notes to leave out so that what I'm playing really rings with what Joe is doing, doesn't get in his way. So that sometimes just means a lot of open fifths and stuff. It occasionally just means, you know, simplifying the voicing of the chords so that the whole thing has a strength to it and doesn't get too cluttered. And it's fun and you know, in its own way just as challenging. It's like we were just talking about. A lot of people will, you know, come down hard on pop music or country music because they think it's somehow beneath them, or Nirvana or something. And we're talking about music that requires a very specific skill set in order to make it be what it needs to be, in order to really make it sing.
Right.
And, you know, when a guy says, "Oh, I could write a pop song in my sleep." Oh, yeah? Okay. Why haven't you done it? Why have you chosen not to make those millions of dollars if it's so easy for you? You know, it's just not true.
Right. And you hear that all the time. Mm-hmm. Too. It's like, oh yeah, you can do this real easy. Here's the formula right here. Okay.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Where's your hit? Yeah. There's
right.
I mean there's where you can break things down into you know, formulaic kind of cookie cutter type stuff. Like that's the bones of you. Think of it as like the foundation of your house. It's the bones, but to make it great is everything else that you surround it with.
Right. Absolutely. And also just, you know, understanding the rules. All these things have rules. In the case of pop music, there are certain sounds that you need to employ. In the case of country music, there are ways that you need to phrase. There are definitely things that you can't play, and then there are things that you have to play. Or I personally have this thing about, I see a lot of guys just like coming down hard. Oh, Kurt Cobain, he couldn't play guitar. So that's not true. You know, he played guitar perfectly for that stuff, and those records sound amazing. And not just any guitar player can pick up a guitar and have the right rhythm feel. You know, the right way to attack the strings, and the right way to voice that stuff so that it sounds cool. You know, and not overdone or overbaked, or, you know, it's just having the right skill set for the moment. I'm not saying that everybody should do that, and I'm certainly not saying that everybody should like it, but I get a little annoyed when people get kind of haughty and superior and think that these other forms are somehow beneath them, when in fact they are, the people who do that stuff well have ascended to the absolute top of their field. You know, that they're examples of real excellence.
Well, and it's in the subtleties. You know, like you're saying, it's how Kurt Cobain palm mutes, or how a certain country guitar player slides, and those things. I think for a lot of musicians, if they're just paying attention to the number of notes or the time signature, you know, how challenging the music sounds, you miss those subtleties that create that feel. You know, a really good example is R&B stuff. You know, I mean, you listen to that guitar on the surface, and all you're hearing is an octave, you know, for an hour. But you try to play that.
And make it groove that way.
And you try to make it groove and lie right in that pocket with that busy bass and the simple drums. That's a lot harder than a, you know, 10-finger tapping line in some ways.
In some ways. But it's because it's about something that you can't learn necessarily. It's about something you feel. You know, you listen to an Al Green record, and there's 8 notes on the whole record. There's a huge amount of space there, but that space is decorated perfectly, you know. And if you have a soul, you feel it, you know.
Yeah. Well, and Dave Grohl actually had just been talking about that in a couple interviews. He was talking about, I mean, the point was to not let technology take over, but I think it fits because he talks about, you know, being you. He said, you know, it's like, hey, you know what? If you want to sing and you sing a little bit sharp, you know, like, that's you. Like, you know, yeah, you can correct all this. Like, hey, if you're a drummer, you drum a little fast. You know what? That's you. It's going to sound like you. And, you know, I think people forget that, you know, we talked about it with the whole Cubase thing and sterile chords, all that stuff. There's that human element that a lot of times we try to practice out of ourselves. You know, we try to, if we can't practice it out, it's like, well, there's got to be a piece of technology that can fix that.
And there is.
But, and there is. But, I mean, some of that stuff you absolutely, like, one of the reasons that Nirvana is who Nirvana is because of some of those reasons.
Yeah.
If Kurt Cobain was a virtuoso guitarist, Nirvana probably wouldn't have been as gritty and as in your face as it needed to become what it was.
They flat out wouldn't have been anywhere near as successful because I think the audience for that music would have suddenly been confused. It's like, why is that guy doing that? Right. You know, if he busted out Yngwie on the solo, it would feel at odds with the message.
With the message, yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Nirvana is who Nirvana was because the whole group, Kurt Cobain, Chris Novoselic,
the time period needed it.
Needed it, and everybody
sure did. God, I remember the night record came out.
Everybody brought their own little, to this day, you listen to some of the stuff that Dave Grohl still does. Obviously, he's not really the drummer for Foo Fighters, but there still has that Dave Grohl influence to hear from Nirvana in pretty much everything he does, and that's why, because he still does what he does. He's not trying to be something that he's not.
No, absolutely. Yeah. And he's maximizing every resource that he brings.
Right.
Have you seen the movie? I haven't.
I was going to ask. I haven't seen it yet. I'm going to probably have to wait until it comes out on like Netflix or whatever. Right. But I want to. I've heard it's awesome.
Yeah, I'm excited.
What movie is it?
Sound City.
Sound City.
The movie that Dave Grohl just directed about the studio where Nevermind was actually recorded.
Oh, cool.
And that's the remaining members of Nirvana just got together with Paul McCartney and did a song that was done for this movie.
Nice.
A bunch of people are in the movie, and there have been a lot of documentaries about recording studios and stuff, but I haven't seen it, but my understanding is that it somehow makes you feel what making music is all about in a way that those other movies didn't quite manage. So
that's cool.
I'm excited about
that.
Yeah,
I've heard really great things about it, but I have not seen it yet.
Yeah. So for the first time, you're playing guitar with Satriani on this episode.
I just found this out today. I saw and he didn't tell me. It was a press release that he just put out announcing the new album that we actually made in January with Vinnie Colaiuta on drums.
And can you buy that album yet?
That comes out May 7th, I think, is what it said in the thing.
Okay.
But yeah, we made this album shrouded in secrecy at Skywalker Ranch in January. With Chris Chaney from Jane's Addiction on bass, and Vinnie Colaiuta, who used to play with Zappa and plays with Sting and a million other people, and is one of the best drummers in history on drums. And those guys were unavailable to do the amount of touring. We're going to be on the road for about 4 months this year, so it's the Mike Keneally band. We got Brian Beller and Marco Miniman, who I've done a ton of live playing and recording with as well. So it's pretty funny actually. But I'm excited to hear what those guys sound like in the Satriani context. It's going to be really different for Joe, for sure.
So recording with Satriani versus playing live with Satriani, what you said in another conversation that being on tour with him is amazing because it's just this kind of chill vibe and
that
carries over to the studio.
That extends to the studio. Yeah, it's a very relaxed environment. First of all, the fact that we're recording on Skywalker Ranch, which is an unbelievable place to it's George Lucas's whole compound that he's got in San Rafael. It's a crazy place to work, and we're recording in a room that is usually used for orchestra scoring for films. So there's room for 150 people in there, and it's just the four of us. So
similar to this facility,
yeah, and a very like this facility, a very helpful staff that see to your every need. Although you said you were going to get us a drink before this started.
Yeah,
that's right.
Good job, Chris.
And so there's certainly the feeling like you're in very comfortable surroundings, and it's not tense, and because there isn't the feeling of pressure, like we have to do this. Naturally, everyone is relaxed, and naturally you become that much more productive. So we were, averaging 1 or let's say 1.5 finished basic masters per day.
Wow.
And so we got 16 tracks recorded in whatever, like 12 days or something. So it was really productive, and yeah, the Satriani vibe is just everything seems super competent and confident, and everyone knows what they're doing, and no one's trying to prove anything, and there's no posturing. everyone's just being real natural, and Joe likes things to just be chill, and that permeates every aspect of the experience. So it's really fun doing stuff with him.
So when you go to a Satriani show, a lot of the time, I mean, sometimes it's hard to tell the difference between the stuff he pulls off in the studio and the stuff he pulls off live. I mean, he's very much the same person. Mm-hmm. Talk a little bit about the recording process for an album. You know, a lot of people like to step record and do things. Does Satriani do that kind of thing, or does he go in and just
well, there's a bedrock of stuff that's pre-recorded, because he does very fleshed out demos prior to going in the studio. And the last album I did with him, Black Swans and Wormhole Wizards, he sent all the players in the band the demos prior to the sessions, and so everybody had the opportunity to make out charts and do that stuff before they got to the recording studio. And this album, a couple of months before the session started, he emailed me and said, you know what, I've been going back and forth in my head, and I haven't decided whether I actually want to send demos to you guys or if I just want to spring the material on you at the session. So I wrote him back a 3-word response, which was, I like surprises. And that was the conversation we had on the topic. And we didn't get any material prior to showing up at the studio. So we were presented with music on the spot. We got there and he gave us all the demos like the night before recording started. So at that point we had the option of being as much prepared or as little prepared as we wanted. For me personally, I really only wanted to deal with the song of the day, Yeah. So he would say, okay, well, we'll work on this one today. And I would run off to the isolated room where the piano was, and I would very quickly sketch out, the signposts of the song. And then we would really discover the song together as we rehearsed it. And pretty much all of the rehearsal run-throughs are being recorded just in case we catch fire. And we're listening in our headphones to some elements of Joe's original demo. So there's always a feeling like, well, it's never going to fall apart, even if we all start playing, ABBA songs by accident. The guy in the computer still knows how the song goes. So that's there as a starting point. And then gradually and some of the elements from Joe's demo end up being a part of the final master, because he does really elaborate guitar tracks at home. They sound good. His playing is great, of course. So some of those elements make it all the way through to the final version. But
so you're playing. I mean, you're playing to those demos with them in your ears.
Yep.
And then you just kind of gradually mute tracks as
basically, he'll say, like we're about to start a song, and he'll say to the guy in the control room, okay, all we need from the demo on this one are those 2 rhythm guitars and that one weird synthy sound, cool. and then a click track, and then we fill in the rest.
That's neat.
Yeah, so he's got all the multis available for the demo, so he can hear as much or as little of the demo elements as we track, and then he finds his part as we go through different takes of the song. He refines his melody, and he really he looks at his guitar parts down to very much the last note. A very simple melody is the result of painstaking thought on Joe's part to phrase it just exactly so. And the decision to go up to this note, or maybe up a half step higher, or to wait an 8th note longer before you go to that note. Yeah. These are really crucial decisions for him because of the importance of how the whole thing sits together as an orchestration, and also the phrasing of the melody, because he's trying to find something that really, again, feels almost vocal in its delivery. So all that stuff, he's from take to take, he's refining his approach. Everyone in the band are refining their approach, which usually it means playing less and allowing the song to stand on its own 2 feet. But the wild card in the bunch was really Vinnie Colaiuta, who can do anything on a set of drums, but he has taste. He has impeccable taste. So it's not like he's imposing polyrhythms or double kicking all over the place. But knowing that that's there on that side of the room, and anything could happen at any instant, and he will occasionally just bust out one thing, and it might only be like for half a bar that he just like does the perfect little contained flurry that just makes you go, oh, we sit back in the control room listening to playbacks, just going, oh my God, that's so good.
So much.
Yeah, exactly. When the canvas is so wide, every gesture has real impact.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to hear. I saw in this press release that on Valentine's Day Joe finished his overdubs and stuff. So hopefully we'll start getting some mixes because I want to hear what this stuff sounds like.
Yeah, very cool. So you spent a couple days here filming with us. Mm-hmm. Talk a little bit about that. What did you do? How do you feel?
Yeah, I feel like I've just run a marathon. This is really out of the ordinary for me. I'm so focused on creating songs all the time. It's really my entire focus. I'm not a technique-oriented guy generally. I'm definitely not a gearhead. I'm all about songs. I'm all about just like combinations of notes and tones and trying to just always develop somehow along those lines. So the opportunity, what we basically did here was use my library of songs, or a small portion of it, and I looking at my own stuff, it's like, what have I done? Because I play the stuff, and at this point I play it, kind of second nature when I'm on stage or whatever. But I'm not really conscious of the techniques that I'm using, and I don't sit there and think about, oh, look at this approach that I developed or something. Because it's not my focus. But in the past few days, to like look at all these things and just be a little more analytical about it, and then to have to describe it verbally, which is a challenge for me, because I think of music as this cosmic thing, and that can't necessarily be contained in words. Not to be precious or to say that what I'm doing is great, but another point is that I don't think I'm responsible for what I do. I honestly don't think that the music starts in me. I'm just hoping to grab a hold of it as it flies by. So I don't take any. I don't do pride. I don't feel prideful about this stuff. I feel very grateful and very happy when something good comes out. Yeah. So to look back on all this stuff is exhausting, but it's also very rewarding in a way that I've never done anything like this before. So I feel very grateful to have gone through this experience.
Yeah, and you said right as we were finishing the session that you hadn't played this much guitar in a long time. And
that's true.
I thought, wow, that's saying a little something.
Even when I'm making a record, it's like you do a take and then you sit back and you listen to it and then you go, okay, well let's change the mix a little bit to see how it sits in the mix and all that stuff. It's not just like relentless playing all the time,
right?
Or even in like, I only play guitar with Dethklok. Even at a Dethklok rehearsal, it's not just playing, just thinking about guitar. There's breaks, there's talking, it's like we were talking and stuff here too, but to be just so focused on the guitar. Yesterday we were here for like 12 hours doing this stuff, and it was, and yeah, I'm feeling it.
It's strangely exhausting. I mean, you wouldn't really think about it. You're just like, oh, well, all I have to do is sit and play guitar in front of a couple cameras.
5 cameras.
It's 5 cameras, and we seem to continually add more and more.
We're getting more, I hear.
Yeah, we're getting more soon. So
there's a camera crew at the door.
But yeah, it's even on our end, it's strangely exhausting. Mm-hmm. And it's not necessarily physically exhausting. It's mentally.
Well, after this film session, that was physically exhausting. So some of these 3-part guitar symphonies, I don't breathe for the entire time he's playing. I'm sitting there like.
And you do, and we kind of take it for granted because we're behind the cameras. We're making sure everything is where it needs to be. We have to kind of listen to what you're saying. It's like, did that make sense, or do we need to stop you or start you or whatever? But I mean, we're in the best position ever because we get live in person
guitar
instruction. we get to watch as the whole thing blossoms.
Yeah.
From that standpoint,
and then relive it for the next 3 months while
you're editing. Well,
I
was. Through this whole process, I was super grateful for you, Chris, for your perspective on what I do, because for me, it was physically exhausting to sit here and play all this guitar, but really it was mentally exhausting to find ways to be eloquent about describing it,
Sure.
talking about and so the fact that I would play a piece of music and then you could say to me, okay, here from our perspective, here's what's really interesting about this. Focus on this.
Sure.
To me, it's I'm almost just like a big wide-eyed, just weird. The star baby at the end of 2001, just like a blob. And so to your ability to like focus on certain things was really helpful for me.
Good. Cool.
It was cool. It was cool. Again, it's like it gave me a new perspective on my own music to realize, that it could be of use in a different way than
Right.
just sound.
Sure.
It can, okay, let's take these songs that I've created or, played a role in their creation that were always just intended for people's ears. And hand them off to players and say, okay, now let's take this in your own hands and see what you make of it. And my dearest hope is that it sparks something in guys and makes them inspired to create different kinds of things.
Yeah.
And for years, people have been saying, when are you going to do instructional videos, or when are you going to put out tabs and all this stuff? And I was like, yeah. I mean, since 1992 and Hat, I was always saying, we'll do transcriptions, we'll put out the folios, we'll do instructional stuff. It never happens. I haven't been focused in that direction, and there were a million other things that I had to do. So and I could never just hand it off to a transcriptionist, because I know they're going to get it all wrong,
right.
unless they
see it.
Unless they see it,
yeah.
Exactly. So this feels like a great step for me. I'm glad finally there's a body of work that represents at least some of the stuff that I've done.
Yeah. Well, if the hard drive doesn't crash, there will be. Yeah. So where are you off to from here?
I have a blessed 3 days at home of rest, which I am going to really use, and then I am going into rehearsal with Brendan Small, the mastermind of Dethklok. He put out a solo. The third Death album came out last year, but a few months before that, Brendan put out a solo record called Brendan Small's Galacticon, which bears some similarity to Dethklok in the way the songs sound and stuff, but it's a bit less death metal and more like classic rock, more Queen influenced. Brian May is a huge influence on Brendan in the way he stacks up guitar harmonies and stuff. And also, unlike Dethklok, where he's doing the these songs have vocal melodies.
Oh, cool.
So he's actually singing. He's got a beautiful singing voice. So this will be what we're doing on March 3rd is something that Brian Beller again has been a key part in masterminding over the years. It's called Westfest. It's a benefit for a scholarship at the Berklee College of Music in the name of Wes Waymiller, who was a bass player who went to Berklee with Brian and Joe Travers and all those guys. And it was a dear friend of ours. He did one gig with me, only one, and he killed it. He was fantastic. And he passed away from thyroid cancer about 8 years ago. And we were all just like shocked and really just left reeling by this. And the idea developed to do something to remember him by and continue to nourish the bass player community. And through all of Brian and all of his friends who are connected with Berklee, the decision was made that there would be a scholarship set up in Wes's name, and every year all of the proceeds from these concerts would go to get a new bass player into the music program at Berklee, and it's worked like crazy. And every year we've generated more money, and there's been great headliners. Alan Holdsworth headlined. And this year, the headline act is Brendan Small's Galacticon. So there's a 4-man guitar section, which is Brendan Small and myself, and Rick Musalam, who also plays guitar in my band, and Jude Gold, who's well known from his work with the guitar magazines and also at MI in Los Angeles, and Brian Beller on bass, and we've got like a 5-piece backup vocal section. It's going to be a big thing, and we're doing this on March 3rd in Los Angeles. So next week is the rehearsal period for that show. That's my next thing.
Cool. So I've been wanting to ask, since we've been back and forth talking about Dethklok and stuff like that, how did Clocktober go over, because Brian talked about that was the big thing, the new album that came out in October. He's like, yeah, we're calling it Clocktober.
Well, I didn't think of it that way. To me, honestly, I'm not sure I ever heard that word. But October was when the album came out, and it's also when we went on the road. The last Dethklok tour was at the end of last year. We were out for about 2 months, and it was fantastic. It was a wonderful tour. It was the first time that Dethklok toured since, I think, 2009. It was 2009 was the last big tour when we were Mastodon was on the bill with us, and that was a great tour. And then in 2010, I don't think we played at all. In 2011, we did a benefit for Cliff Cultrari at the House of Blues in LA, and we did one big gig, which was headlining at the Mayhem Festival for the opening night of the Mayhem Festival. That Megadeth couldn't make that one show. They were the nominal headliner for the whole tour. They couldn't do that one show, so we came and filled in for them, and it was cool to only do one show that year and have it be for 100,000 people. So that was fun. But finally we got on the road again, and it was just killer. But for me, it was the most fulfilling and the most fun and the coolest Dethklok tour. I don't know have you guys ever seen a Dethklok show?
Have not.
I've seen it a couple times.
All right, so you know the vibe. There's a huge screen, a huge LED screen that's suspended above us. And if anybody's listening who doesn't know the deal with Dethklok, it's connected with this TV cartoon Metalocalypse, right. And it's a fictional cartoon band called Dethklok, but we're the real band that plays the songs live. But every note that we play on stage is being played by the cartoon band on the screen above us. Our drummer Gene Hoagland has got a pair of headphones on. He's attached to a click with different audio cues that keep the show that we're playing synced up with all these visuals.
Wow.
So it's a combination. What you see on the screen is the band sometimes, and then sometimes it's a conceptual type video, like an MTV video type thing, back when MTV showed videos. So it's just an hour-long onslaught, and audiences lose their minds. It's because it's feeding every one of your senses, and it's just over the top, and it's a very exhilarating thing to be a part of. Mm-hmm. And an unexpected thing for me, it's like I kind of had gotten involved in the traditional muso side of the music business and stuff, and never really got too involved with metal music. Like Vai was probably the most metal of all the guys, except I did a couple albums with James LaBrie had this thing called Mall Muzzler that certainly had aspects of metal, but that wasn't like a full-time band project. So to suddenly at this stage of my career, I've been doing this for a while, to take this unexpected detour into this hardcore metal world, but still connected with humor and cartoons. It was like this melding. It was just the right moment for it. Just like animation fans, metal fans didn't realize that the cross section of those two subgroups was so strong, and that apparently they were just waiting for something like this to happen. Because when that show started, when Metalocalypse first hit the airwaves, it was the response was instantaneous, and there was a demand to make an album, and so he did the first Death album, and sold like 100,000 copies instantly, and was the fastest selling death metal album in U.S. history.
Crazy.
So all of a sudden, I find myself in one of the biggest selling metal bands in history.
Right.
Very unexpectedly,
Yeah.
I didn't see that coming, but I am really, really grateful for it. It's been just nonstop good times, really great.
That's cool.
And I'm grateful for the impact that it's had on my playing. It's really involves a lot of endurance and a lot of focus. You really want the texture of the thing to be consistent and to be constantly explosive, and you realize that sometimes that means playing lighter as opposed to to get the right kind of you just like you get very focused on your picking technique and the way you hold the guitar and stuff. It's a very different sound from things that I do in my own music, so I'm grateful for the opportunity to sort of expand my weapons arsenal that way.
And that goes along with the greatest piece of advice I ever received from anybody. Was like, well, if you find yourself in a rut, or you want to try doing new stuff, new things, study something that you're not interested in. And let those ideas, let those techniques, absorb into what you do, and all of a sudden, there you go.
Yeah. Well, I always dug a good metal album. It's not that I was spending a lot of time sitting around listening to it, but I appreciated it. Admired the people who do it well, and we take it really seriously. It's a lot of people think that it's a parody of a metal band or something. It's really not. We're very devoted to making the music as good as it can possibly be. So I love the fact that I've had to stretch out into this other discipline. It's brought me a lot of good times. It's great. And another cool thing to do, like you just said, to expand your your sort of realm of awareness is to learn stuff that other instrumentalists play. It's like try to figure out a Coltrane lick, or something that Thelonious Monk did on the piano or something.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, and see if you can do that on the guitar. All of a sudden, you'll see combinations of notes and directions you can go in that you never even imagined before.
Right.
Very cool. Well, I think people already know where to go if they want to find out more about your music. Dethklok, your Mike Keneally band.
Yep. Well,
Vai, Satriani,
yep.
Zappa.
Mm-hmm. Well, just Google Keneally, or
you have a website,
or go to Keneally.com. Or also, if you really just want to know, just to hear my music, that we have a website called RadioKeneally.com that streams all of my released music and a whole bunch of otherwise unreleased music. There's hundreds of songs up there.
Cool.
It's RadioKeneally.com. It's streaming 24 hours a day.
Awesome. Keneally Radio. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Very cool.
All right. Well, I think that just about does it for this episode. Mike, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Totally my pleasure. Thank
Chris,
you.
I would like a glass of water.
Later.
Garçon.
Podcast
All right, podcast out.
And that's this week's edition of the JamPlay Podcast. We'll be back next week with a new guest and more amazing musical banter. In the meantime, if you have any feedback, please send it to podcast@jamplay.com. Also, be sure to check us out on Facebook, facebook.com/jamplay, and on YouTube, youtube.com/jamplay.com, and the dot is spelled out. Until next time.